Have you ever stopped to think about what really matters before it's too late? Imagine having everything you've ever dreamed of, but discovering at the last second that you've lost what really made a difference. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a man who only realized the value of his father when he could no longer go back. And believe me, the price of this lesson was very high. Stay until the end, because what you're about to hear could change the way you see the world. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to our story from. This helps us continue to bring you stories that will touch your heart. Hayter grew up in a humble neighborhood, surrounded by cobblestone streets and small houses, where each person knew the other's story. From a very young age, he showed a sparkle in his eyes that stood out among his peers. It was as if he was determined to take the world into his own hands, escape the hardships that bothered him so much, and lead his father to a better life. His father, Roberto, was a simple, hard-working man who lived off odd jobs and small repairs around the neighborhood. Even though he earned little, he made sure that his son never ran out of food on his plate. And above all, he dedicated unconditional affection to her. Roberto's hands were calloused from tightening screws, holding tools and building walls on makeshift construction sites. Despite this physical wear and tear, he never lost heart. The sincere smile he gave everyone showed how much he was at peace with the path he had chosen. He was most proud of seeing Hayter grow up and seeing in the boy that burning ambition that went beyond the limits of the neighborhood where they lived. When Hayter was a teenager, he dreamed of becoming a great businessman. While most boys his age were thinking about playing soccer or running around the streets, he sat in front of old books inherited from community libraries and studied. He liked to devour stories of tycoons who came from nothing, examples of overcoming obstacles that showed how willpower and intelligence could lead someone to great achievements. Hayter saw college in a big city as the gateway to a future millionaire. Roberto was proud, but he also feared that his son's ambition would become excessive. One night, after a tiring day at work, he sat next to Hayter at the dinner table. They had only rice, beans, and some vegetables picked from the garden in the backyard. While they ate, Roberto asked, "You study so much, son. What do you expect to find far away from here?" Hayter, with an intense glow in his eyes, replied, "Dad, I want to achieve what we never had. A big house, comfort, being able to buy whatever I want without worrying about the price. I want to give you a better life." Roberto, although admired, raised his eyebrows slightly. "There's nothing wrong with dreaming big," said his father. "But you can't forget that the simple things in life are also important. The love, care, and respect we have here cannot be bought with money." Hayter smiled, a little impatiently. In his young mind, it was difficult to understand why anyone would settle for so little. He believed that financial success would solve everything. Time passed, and after many difficulties, Hayter managed to get a partial scholarship to a respected college of administration and finance. His father could hardly believe it when he heard the news. When he saw his son's victorious expression, he was sure that he should support him unconditionally. On the day Hayter left, they said goodbye at the bus station in the neighboring city. He was carrying only a simple suitcase, his heart overflowing with hope and some insecurity in the face of the unknown. Roberto, with tears held back, handed his son an envelope with part of his savings. "It's not much, but it will help you if there is an emergency. Take care of yourself, my boy." Hayter tried to refuse because he knew the sacrifice his father was making, but Roberto insisted. And so the bus continued, leaving behind the simple man who saw his son heading towards a future that he himself could never achieve. In the capital, Hayter was surprised by the size of the buildings, the rush of people, and the luxury that some of his classmates displayed. In the first few weeks, he even felt inferior. Some boys from rich families showed up with imported cars, expensive laptops, and designer clothes. He, on the other hand, only had formal clothes bought on sale and used a worn notebook to write everything down. Even so, he was not intimidated. He spent hours in the library studying each chapter and dreaming about the change he wanted to bring to his father. Little by little, he met influential people. He went to lectures by big businessmen and, at one of them, he had the audacity to approach Artur Montenegro, a renowned real estate developer who boasted powerful connections. Heitor introduced himself, saying that he was willing to work in any role to learn and grow. Artur, surprised by the young man's confidence, saw in him a spark of ambition that could be very useful. He gave him the card of an assistant and asked him to schedule a meeting about a possible internship. This opportunity marked a turning point in Heitor's life. Despite his arduous studies, he found time to do an internship at Montenegro's company, starting in the administrative department. Little by little, he began to stand out, earning praise for his dedication and energy. He arrived before everyone else, left after everyone else, accepted extra tasks, and spared no effort to show his worth. Every day, the possibility of professional advancement became more concrete, feeding his hunger to become important, recognized, and, above all, very rich. With his busy schedule, Heitor began to have less and less contact with Roberto. Before, he would call frequently to find out how his father was doing, but this became increasingly rare. Many times, his father would call and he would not answer, or would answer in a hurry, saying he couldn't talk much. He would always promise to call back, but in practice, he almost never did. Roberto, feeling his son's absence, consoled himself by thinking that the sacrifices were part of the success that Heitor sought. When the first college vacation arrived, Heitor did not return home. He chose to accept a temporary full-time internship, aiming to gain experience and extra money. His father asked when he planned to visit the city, and Heitor replied that he did not have time, that he was in the middle of an important project. Roberto, although sad, did not complain, and continued sending messages of support because he believed that it would all be worth it in the end. After graduating, Heitor received an invitation from Artur Montenegro to join a large real estate project. It involved opening several construction sites in upscale areas of the city with the promise of stratospheric profits. Heitor, overjoyed, accepted the proposal. He was still under the influence of excitement when he thought that he would finally be able to fulfill his promise to help his father financially. In fact, he began to earn a considerable salary, bought more expensive clothes, a state-of-the-art cell phone, and even a car. He began to live in a better apartment, close to the office. Sometime later, he decided to pay his father a quick visit. He arrived in an imported car in the old humble neighborhood, drawing everyone's attention. It was a sunny Sunday, and Roberto was anxiously waiting for him in front of the house. When he saw him, he hugged him with a mixture of joy and strangeness because Heitor seemed different, more distant, worried about checking his watch or cell phone all the time. Upon entering the modest house, Heitor noticed that nothing had changed. The walls had peeling paint. The furniture was the same as always. He offered money for his father to renovate everything, but he didn't stay for dinner. He said he needed to be back before nightfall for a meeting the next day. Roberto tried to convince him, talking about the chicken and rice he had prepared, but it was in vain. Heitor left in less than an hour, leaving an envelope of money on the table. The father, alone at the door, just watched the car drive away while holding the envelope with some discomfort. Roberto's expression was that of a man who loved his son unconditionally, but who noticed an immense distance emerging between them. In Montenegro's office, Heitor immersed himself even further in the business world. He began attending luxury dinners, gala events, and meetings with major investors, nurturing the idea of multiplying his earnings. The higher he climbed, the less contact he had with his father. In the meantime, Roberto developed health problems. I felt strange pains in my chest, which became more and more frequent. Although worried, the father did not want to be a burden to his son and tried his best to take care of him alone, resorting to the small local hospital. Meanwhile, Heitor was involved in increasingly complex negotiations involving land concessions and approvals for construction permits in sensitive environmental areas. Many documents appeared with nebulous terms, something that made him slightly uncomfortable. But when he expressed his reservations, Montenegro reassured him. "Don't worry, Heitor. That's how big business works. Everyone does the same thing, and we have influential people inside and outside the public administration." Heitor's ambition made him close his eyes to the possibility of any illegality, as he didn't want to jeopardize his growing fortune. One afternoon, the father, who was already weak, decided to go to the capital to see a cardiologist. Since he wanted to make the most of the trip, he decided to surprise his son. He went to the construction company building and went up in the glass elevator, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. When he got to the reception, the secretary looked at the simple man with a certain disdain. He asked to speak to Heitor, explaining that it was his father. The secretary called the boy's office, informing him that his father was there and asking if she could see him. Heitor, in the middle of a meeting, was irritated by the interruption but agreed to answer quickly. When Roberto came in, Heitor got up from his chair, forcing a smile. He gave his father a somewhat formal hug, as if he were worried about who might be watching. Roberto was holding some exams, ready to talk, but Heitor seemed more interested in knowing why he had shown up unannounced. His father explained that he had come to the doctor and wanted to visit him. He then tried to talk about the seriousness of his health, but his son, constantly checking his watch, only reinforced that he had a lot of commitments. He offered money for better treatment, promised to take care of everything soon, but did not open the door for a deeper conversation. "Dad, it's not a lack of will," Heitor explained. "It's just that I'm going through a decisive moment here, you know." Roberto nodded, although his expression betrayed disappointment. Still, he found the strength to say, "I'm proud of you, son. Just don't forget that we need time together too. Sometimes a hug and a conversation are worth more than a bank account." At these words, Hector felt slightly disturbed, but he let his father go as they were already calling him back to the meeting. Time passed and the suspicious dealings of the construction company came to the attention of the authorities. Heitor, now responsible for some important documents, realized that Montenegro's scheme went far beyond a mere flexibilization of licenses. There was embezzlement of funds, bribes, and falsification of data. The young man began to fear a police investigation, but Montenegro reinforced that everything was under control. During the same period, Roberto's health deteriorated. He fell ill at home and was rushed to the hospital. Unable to afford to go to a large hospital on his own, he stayed at a simple hospital in the city. The neighbor, worried about the seriousness of the situation, decided to call Heitor because she knew that his father did not want to disturb him. When the phone rang, the young man answered. "Hi, who is this?" "It's me, your father's neighbor. He is hospitalized, and the situation seems serious." Heitor felt as if his world was falling apart. He asked his boss if he could leave early to go to his hometown, but that very day, the police knocked on the doors of the construction company with search and seizure warrants. The investigators collected papers and computers and took Montenegro to give a statement. They demanded Heitor's presence, who in a panic said that he needed to see his father. However, the police officer explained that he could not leave immediately because they needed urgent clarification. He spent hours at the police station, answering questions and being confronted with documents he had signed. With each passing minute, Heitor knew that his father, lying in a hospital bed, might need him to survive. When he was finally released, it was already past 9 at night. He got into his car and sped down the dark road, feeling a lump in his throat. His cell phone vibrated with another call from his neighbor. When he answered, he heard a distressed voice. "Come quickly, Heitor. Your father is worse." He stepped on the gas even more, the streetlights passing by like shadows. He ruminated on regret and fear. wondering if he would be able to get there in time to save his father. When he parked in front of the hospital, he jumped out of the car and ran through the hallways, looking for the room. He found Roberto in a simple hospital bed, surrounded by old equipment and devices. A doctor tried to explain the gravity of the situation, saying that the patient needed urgent intervention, but that the local hospital did not have advanced resources. The father, very pale, opened his eyes when he heard his son's voice, and a hint of a smile formed on his lips. Heitor approached, held his father's hand, and begged for forgiveness. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. I'm going to take you to a better place right now." Roberto shook his head slightly. "Don't blame yourself, son. I know you were busy trying to succeed in life. I've always been proud of your effort." Heitor cried, the tears escaping uncontrollably. He wanted to go back in time, to be less absent, to have given more importance to that simple man who had dedicated his entire life to him. As he tried to comfort him, he noticed that his father's breathing was becoming weaker and weaker. Roberto made a last effort to speak. "Just don't forget humility, family, love." Then his chest stopped rising and falling, and the monitor emitted a high-pitched, uninterrupted sound indicating the absence of a heartbeat. Heitor called for the nurses, but all he could do was watch his father pass away before his eyes. He felt devastated, as if an irreparable hole had been opened inside him. The wake was held in the town's small chapel. Friends and acquaintances came to pay their respects. Many said that Roberto had always been proud of his son, but he also expressed his longing. Heitor, in deep mourning, spent most of the time staring at the coffin, regretting not having been there. He looked at the old photos that had been placed next to the body. His father, as a young man, smiling, and himself, as a boy, sitting on his father's lap. The grief consumed him like a fire in his soul. After the funeral, Heitor stayed at his father's house, alone. He opened drawers and found letters that Roberto had written but never sent, keeping with him all the affection he wanted to share. In some, his father spoke of sleepless nights thinking about his son's health, expressed his joy at seeing each advance in college, and gathered newspaper clippings that mentioned Heitor's projects at the construction company. In each line, there was genuine pride and longing. Reading them was like being punched in the chest. In the following days, Heitor had to face the investigation into corruption and fraud. Amidst the pain of mourning, he found himself at the police station, reviewing documents that confirmed his involvement, albeit indirect. His lawyer suggested that he lie, saying that he had never known about Montenegro's schemes. However, consumed by guilt for having ignored everything out of greed, Heitor decided to tell the truth. In court, he cooperated with the investigation, handed over documents, and admitted his mistake. As a result, he ended up having a falling out with Montenegro and suffered retaliation from others involved, but he could no longer deny it. He ended up receiving a relatively lenient sentence compared to the rest of the leadership because he helped dismantle the scheme. Montenegro was sentenced to years in prison. Heitor had part of his assets frozen and found himself in a critical financial situation. After completing all the legal formalities, he returned to his old home, where his father was no longer waiting for him on the porch. The house was frozen in time and in need of repairs. Without money, but determined to do the right thing, Heitor bought cheap paint, climbed onto the roof, replaced the rotten wood, and painted the facade himself. The manual labor that his father had done so much of his life became his way of redeeming himself. As he tidied up every corner of the house, he remembered fragments of his childhood. His father who fixed bicycles, his father who improvised shoes when they couldn't afford to buy new ones, his father who smiled, sweaty, after an exhausting day of work. All that effort was filled with love. Hector finally understood that he had despised the greatest treasure in life, the presence of those who loved him unconditionally. Once the house was clean and habitable, he decided to open a small business on the land for the local community. He thought, "I can use what I have learned to help the people here without making the same mistakes as in the past. He took out a modest loan from a local bank without any subterfuge or corruption, just to get started. A construction materials store, something that could serve the neighbors, offering fairer conditions and also creating some jobs. The idea was to give back everything he had received in life and teach the young people in the neighborhood that it is possible to grow honestly. Over time, the little shop began to attract customers. Heitor, who previously dealt with million-dollar figures, now talked about bags of cement, paint, and simple tools. In each conversation, he conveyed the knowledge of someone who had once been on high, but had learned the hard way that money cannot cure regret. The residents began to view him with respect, recognizing his commitment to rebuilding not only his father's house, but also his own dignity. One day, he placed a photo of Roberto smiling in a corner of the counter. Below the image, a small handwritten note that said, "The greatest inheritance we can have is the unconditional love of those who created us." In moments of sadness, Heitor would look at the photo, remember his father's last words, and find the strength to carry on. Time passed, and Heitor remained firm in his purpose of growing up honestly, even without the luxury and ostentation he had sought so much in the past. He left aside his desire for expensive cars, sophisticated parties, and mansions. Now, his focus was on helping the community, developing improvement projects such as donating materials to the homes of needy people, encouraging young people to study and follow a different path than the one he had taken. Once, a boy from the neighborhood, who reminded him of Hector as a child, approached him and asked how he could succeed in life if he didn't have access to good schools or opportunities. Hector smiled, bent down to the boy's level and said, "Fight for your dreams, study, work honestly, and never forget the people who truly love you. Without them, success is empty." It was as if he were speaking to his old self. One silent night, after closing the store, Heitor returned home, tidied up the small living room, and lit a candle next to another photo of his father, this time of a moment when they were together, smiling after a concert they had held at a neighbor's gate. He placed his hand over the image, his eyes filled with unshed tears. There was no going back, no way to relive what had been lost. But there was a way to honor Roberto's memory, perpetuating the love he preached so much. As the candle flame flickered, Hector spoke softly as if his father could hear him. "I hope you are proud of me now, Father. I know I will never be able to make up for the time I lost by your side, but everything I do is to keep your lesson alive. No money is worth more than family." In the days that followed, that feeling of guilt persisted, but it also turned into motivation to act correctly. Heitor began to give simple lectures on honest entrepreneurship to the young people in the neighborhood, sharing his story not as a triumph, but as a warning. Fortune does not always bring happiness if, along the way, you forget the ones you love. That region, previously so lacking in opportunities, began to receive small improvements, partly due to the involvement of Heitor and some residents who came together to renovate streets, create leisure areas, and encourage education. There were no more limousines, no more elite parties, but there was something Hector had rediscovered: peace of mind. He still remembered the luxuries he had had, but he understood that without his father, without his family, that comfort meant nothing. Now, every advance in the store, every compliment from the neighbors, every child who smiled at being able to buy a new notebook without abusive prices, represented a genuine victory. One late afternoon, after serving the last customer, Heitor closed the shop doors and contemplated the sunset. The orange sky reminded him of his old childhood afternoons when he would sit next to his father and talk about his dreams. He realized that in some way he was making part of those dreams come true. But without stepping on anyone, without getting lost along the way, without turning his back on his roots. The sadness of Roberto's absence still hurt, but it was a pain that awakened him to what really mattered. The neighbor, who had witnessed her father's difficulties so many times, came to greet him. "You've changed a lot, Hector. I see a different person in your eyes." He nodded, feeling a pang of longing. "I think that sometimes we only learn after we lose the person who matters most." She gave a sad smile. "But you're still here, making a difference. That also counts for a lot." There was the man who had once dreamed of sumptuous mansions, carrying tools in his hands and helping a bricklayer unload bricks for a construction site in the community. Many might not recognize the young man who once wore expensive suits and closed million-dollar contracts. But Hector recognized himself in the mirror. Someone who was reborn from guilt to honor his father's memory and find happiness again in small gestures of humanity. Roberto's memory came alive with every social project that Hector involved the local company in. Every house renovated without charging abusive interest. Every smile he saw on a worker's face when paying a fair price for materials. The past of corruption and greed was now a ghost that served as a daily lesson, reminding him of where he came from and of everything he had lost because of his pride. One day, Hector decided to organize a simple get-together for the neighborhood residents. He set up a few tables, ordered some home-cooked food, and invited the children to play in a vacant lot that he planned to turn into a square in the future. During the party, a boy asked him, "Uncle, is it true that you were very rich?" Hector thought about what to say. He still had some money, but it wasn't nearly as much as he had in his prime. He bent down to the child's height and said, "I had a lot of money, but I wasn't really rich because I didn't value the right things. Today, I feel much richer being able to be here with you, laughing, sharing moments with family and friends." The boy smiled as if he didn't completely understand, but could see the sincerity in his words. As night fell, people began to say goodbye, and Hector was left alone, packing up the chairs. He looked up at the starry sky and remembered an old conversation he had with his father when he was a child, and they were both sitting at the door of their house, watching the sky. Roberto had said something about each star representing a chance that life gives us to be better. At that moment, Hector felt his father's presence almost palpably, as if he could hear his calm voice saying, "My son, I am still here, in your heart." He wiped away a tear that was forming, took a deep breath and felt a deep peace, a sense of duty to the legacy of honesty and humility that his father had tried to teach him throughout his life. Hector's ambition was still alive, but now it had a new form. He wanted to make a difference, to be useful, to honor the love he had received and, in a way, to care for people as his father had cared for him. His store grew gradually, sustainably, without taking illegal shortcuts. The respect he gained in the community led many to believe in the project, provide support, and even regional investors showed interest in expanding the business to other underprivileged neighborhoods. This time, however, Hector was extremely careful before signing any contract, reading every clause and demanding that everything be done with the utmost transparency. At one of the meetings with local investors, a man recognized him from when he was involved with Montenegro. Surprised, I wanted to know if he wasn't afraid to take risks again. Hector replied, "I am afraid, yes, but fear keeps me alert so I don't repeat the mistakes. If the business is not clean, I prefer to stay out." Faced with Hector's firmness, the man agreed to the terms and emphasized that the reputation he was building was something rare in the business world. The former young man who had chased money at any cost had become a responsible adult, aware that true wealth is not limited to numbers in a bank account. Even so, every now and then, a pang of longing would strike Hector's chest. In calm moments, she remembered scenes of her father. That voice that always called him to wake up early, the tired face when he came back from work, the calloused hands that prepared coffee, the way he saved every penny to give his son a better chance. I realized that everything I had done was ultimately to repay that care. But in the process, he lost his way and forgot that his father didn't just want money, wanted the presence of the son. Now there was nothing left to do but move on, transforming the pain into gratitude. When he received praise for his community work or the honest growth of the store, Heitor always responded that much of the merit came from the example of his father, a simple man, but with a gigantic heart. One year, close to the anniversary of Roberto's death, Heitor decided to organize a group effort to renovate the homes of the poorest families in the neighborhood. Several people showed up to help, carrying cans of paint, bricks, wood, and tiles. In every painted wall and every hole repaired, he felt his father's presence. People thanked him and often asked why he invested time and money in this, instead of focusing solely on profit. Heitor replied that there were certain things in life that were worth much more than just making money. In the hallways of one of the houses under renovation, he found a boy sitting, holding a cloth to wipe away his sweat. The boy looked at Hector and asked, "Don't you miss your father?" Hector sighed. He sat down next to the boy, stirring the paint bucket, and answered honestly, "I miss him a lot, and I will miss him forever. I wish I had more time with him, but I can only honor him by continuing what he taught me, honest work and love for people." The boy smiled, as if he understood the depth of that pain. Then they both went back to work. When the mutirão ended, the street was more alive, more colorful. The houses, previously gray, acquired light and vibrant tones. The children ran happily, and the parents watched with admiration at the gesture of solidarity. Amidst the thanks, Hector fell into a brief moment of silence, raised his eyes to the sky, and murmured a prayer of gratitude to Roberto. He knew that if his father were there, he might say something like, "That's how it is, son. That's how life really is." News of the community reform project began to spread throughout the city, and many wanted to help or replicate the initiative in other neighborhoods. Heitor received invitations to speak at social entrepreneurship events, telling the story of a man who, at the height of his greed, forgot about those who mattered most and paid dearly for it. He began to speak openly about the mistakes he had made, about how his unbridled pursuit of wealth caused him to lose his father without having time to thank him for all the love he had received. People were moved to tears when they heard his story, and some businessmen approached him to congratulate him on his transparency, as it is unusual for someone to admit mistakes so openly. Heitor, however, did not do this to win applause. He did it to warn other young people who could be following the same risky path, believing that money is everything and leaving family and values aside. Even with this new purpose in life, Heitor never stopped feeling Roberto's absence. On colder nights, he would wake up scared, remembering the day he arrived late at the hospital. He would relive the scene, hearing his father's last breath and the heart monitor indicating that he had stopped. He tried to calm himself down by remembering Roberto's last words, focusing on the certainty that at least he was able to hold his hand and tell him how much he loved him, even if it was too late. The court decisions on his case were finalized. He was freed from some of the more severe charges for having cooperated with the justice system, but he had to pay fines and compensation, considerably reducing his assets. He accepted everything as a consequence of the wrong path he had taken. He no longer wanted to escape responsibility, and every time he deposited the money into the court account, he thought that if he had kept upright from the beginning, none of this would have been necessary. However, he also saw this process as an opportunity for a new beginning. Free from the burden of investigations and guided by renewed moral principles, he focused even more on running the local business and gradually expanding the scope of his aid projects. He began visiting public schools to encourage young people to embrace education, offered small internship grants at his store, and saw humble boys and girls flourish, reminding him of his own youthful desire to prosper. One day, sitting on the renovated porch of his old house, Heitor picked up a notebook where he listed the dreams he had once had. For a long time, that notebook had been forgotten in boxes. As he leafed through it, he came across goals like owning a huge construction company, owning a mansion, buying a yacht. He read each item with a melancholic smile, realizing how much priorities change. Then he picked up a pen and added another type of goal: to positively impact the lives of 100 needy families. That seemed more meaningful than anything he had written before. He still traveled occasionally to the capital to resolve issues or hold meetings with specific partners. But whenever he arrived, he felt a huge difference in the way he saw the big city. He no longer saw it as just an opportunity for infinite profit, but rather a place where many lost themselves in empty ambitions. At the same time, he admired those who managed to balance success and humanity. When he met old acquaintances, some were surprised by his change. Others kept their distance, perhaps because they remembered past scandals. He no longer cared because he was certain that his internal transformation was genuine and did not need the approval of others. Little by little, people who had previously doubted him began to realize that Hator was acting differently. They said that of all the people involved in Montenegro's scheme, he was the only one who decided to stay in his hometown, create something positive, and face the moral judgment of the community. His previously tarnished image began to take on a new color, that of a man who, despite being late, recognized his mistakes and had the courage to change. On one of Hator's birthdays, a group of residents showed up to bring him a homemade cake. He was surprised and moved because it symbolized the affection the community had developed for him. As they cut the cake, an elderly man who was a friend of Roberto's said, "Your father would be very happy to see what you've become. He always said that what he wanted most was a kind and hard-working son. I think he got that after all." Hator couldn't hold back his tears. That sentence contained something he desperately wanted to hear. A piece of peace came over him, as if he could actually feel his father's presence in that moment of celebration. Over the years, the store became a regional reference, and Hator expanded its activities, opening branches in nearby neighborhoods. He remained faithful to principles of fairness, affordable prices, low-interest financing, and encouraging learning and employee training. At each new stage, he made sure to remember who he was and where he came from, keeping a large photo of Roberto at the main headquarters. This way, everyone who entered the store would know the invisible mentor who inspired that business vision. At a local event, Hator was invited to speak on stage about how social entrepreneurship can transform communities. Before going up, he took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and visualized his father. Then he told his story without hiding the painful parts. The poverty of his childhood, his meteoric rise, the fall involving corruption, and the irreparable loss of Roberto. The audience listened in silence, some with tears in their eyes, because this was not just a canned motivational speech. This was real life, full of failures, regrets, and new beginnings. At the end, he concluded, "If I can leave you with just one message, it is this: take care of the ones you love. Professional success does not compensate for the emptiness of losing the one who gave us everything. Money, fame, and power will not bring back the time lost with the ones who truly matter." The applause was intense, but Hator did not smile out of vanity. What he felt was a deep gratitude for having survived his own choices and having been given a second chance. After leaving the stage, he was approached by young entrepreneurs who asked for advice and congratulated him on the honest way he ran his business. He was willing to help whenever possible, seeing in it a reflection of the past, when he himself had dreams but needed solid guidance. Deep down, he was certain that, although it was too late to value his father while he was alive, he could still keep alive the teachings that Roberto had always tried to pass on to him. The pain and longing would never disappear completely, but they had become a fuel that motivated Hator to be better every day. In the end, he had learned that true love survives even after death, because it remains ingrained in the actions of those who remain. Thus, the story of the millionaire who only appreciated his father when it was too late became an example for everyone who heard about it. In that simple neighborhood, Hector went from being an absent and arrogant young man to a community leader who reached out to anyone in need. And in the process, he discovered true wealth, that of a heart at peace, and the certainty that somehow his father would be proud to see him follow an honorable path, full of compassion and generosity. And every time someone praised him for his initiatives, Hector would look down at Roberto's photo, placed in a prominent place on the shelf, and whisper silently, "Dad, I hope you're seeing. Nothing I do will bring you back, but every act of kindness is the way I found to keep you alive in my heart." This is where the story reaches its conclusion. Hector lived without sparing any effort to make a difference, remembering every day the fatal mistake of having left his father aside. The guilt transformed him, teaching him the greatness of true affection and showing him that not all the money in the world can compensate for the absence of someone who is gone forever. If before he had aimed for the top, now he understood that the greatest achievement in life was to look around him and see the good he was spreading, inspired by a simple man with a pure heart who had given his entire life for his son without ever expecting anything in return other than his love.